You'd think for kind of a sketchy back road, this road wouldn't get nearly the traffic it does. I can barely get through here. Anyway, shut up, I'm doing my intro. Anyway, how are y'all doing amidst these cars and traffic? Steve here with you. Today is March 17th, 2021. So you know what there's always someone sanding or cutting something. But that means today we have a fresh story from the past in a new episode of This Day. I almost forgot the title. I'm like, this day in history. And this is a big story. Not in terms of the effects it had, just in terms of pure numbers. Exactly the kind of over-the-top journalism that really had no purpose being published in newspapers, but it was because it was entertaining. That ought to get you on the hook. So for our sake, it is March 17th, 1905, and a guy named Joe Perry is a key witness in a trial. And he is originally from Ontario, Canada. He's from a family of French Canadians, as it was referenced in the newspaper. And apparently, him and his siblings, all were born, grew up in that area, and a lot of them kind of slowly spread down into Oregon over time, with a lot of them settling in Eastern Oregon. And according to the article, this particular guy, Joe Perry, who was the main source that sparked what this article was about, because it wasn't really about the case that he was a witness for, even though you'd think that would be an entertaining enough story to go on. But Joe Perry was from the town of Freewater, which is now known as Milton Freewater. Such a small town that they had to, I want to say they combined two small towns together. I could be absolutely wrong about that, but I want to say somebody told me that once. It's always the most reliable resource in the world when the person that you think you got information from is just somebody whose name you can't remember. But anyway, Milton Freewater, as it's called today, is an Eastern Oregon town just south of the Washington border, just south of Walla Walla. So that's where Joe Perry and apparently a lot of his other siblings relocated to kind of that general region. But the article I found, it introduces us to Joe Perry, where he's from, why we're talking about him. He's the witness in this case. But that's just the first little snippet from this article, because the bulk of the article is more focused on Joe Perry and his family. Now, why would the family of a random witness be more intriguing to the press than a ongoing, again, they just say it's a case, so I don't know if that means it was a murder, a robbery, who knows. But why would this guy's family be of more interest than the case that he was a witness in? Well, it could be that Joe Perry had 20 siblings. Seriously. 20 siblings. I think up until the moment I found this article, the most children I'd ever heard of a family having was probably about 14. We've heard stories about people having 8 kids, 8 plus 8. I've heard stories about people having 10 kids, 12 kids, but I think the most I'd ever heard of was a family that had 14 kids. And the article even references how, even by 1905, this was becoming less of a thing, but back in the good old days, the days that even by 1905 were the old days, it was considered like you were a very reputable family, and you had a good reputation for having a lot of kids. It was something that was revered. But the Perry family took that and just coked up and just went above and beyond. I would not surprise me in the annals of history if there is some family that's had more, but this is by a wide margin the most kids that I've ever heard of one husband and one wife having. And it's just, you compare it to today. A lot of people, nowadays with the way everything's going, the way our economy is, you have one kid and it's like, oh God, we're screwed. Granted, money was worth more back then, but still 21 kids? Like, what? And by the time this story was reported, Joe Perry was pushing 60, so most of his siblings were, middle-aged. Their father had died in his mid-80s, and even then he died nearly a decade earlier. So it's not like this was a young family and all of a sudden it was found out. Like, these siblings had been living for decades. So I get the feeling that, people that were close to the family, relatives, friends, things like that, like they knew, but it was just something that was known. It wasn't something that really made it newsworthy. And I get the feeling based on this that this trial was going on and the press is there and they're looking to interview people and get whatever information they can, and Joe Perry's a witness, so they go and talk to them. And somewhere, this is just what I think happened, somewhere in that conversation Joe Perry makes reference that he's 1 out of 21 kids, and the reporter eyes light up. And all of a sudden it's like, the hell with this case. This is a far more interesting story, because the article doesn't really give any details about why this guy is here for this particular case. But it laid down so many intricate details about Joe Perry and his family. This article knew every other sibling he had that was living within the county there. It listed their names. It even expressed that one of his brothers had passed away recently, one of the ones that had moved to Eastern Oregon. And it even went so far as to express, for the sake of shock, like, look at how many people these are, that it expressed that Joe Perry was 58 years old at the time this article came out, and that obviously some of his siblings were probably older than him, some of his siblings were younger than him. When there's 21 of you, it's unlikely that you're going to be the oldest or the youngest. So the article went on to blather about how, well, if you implied that every one of his siblings was 58 years old, just like he was, that's still like more than 12,000 years of life between him and his siblings, which really is totally irrelevant. It doesn't really mean anything because obviously all of his siblings aren't the same age as him. But it just kind of shows how just, obviously once they got that piece of information, the reporter who wrote it just went nuts with it and just was like, what are all the different nuances I can employ to milk this for all that it's worth, which wasn't really that much. So I liked it for that aspect, but I also liked it for the fact that 21 kids, like, that's nuts. How did you get any sleep as parents? You had like 10 to 13 babies at any given time, like, just, and smiley face. And, so of course they also had, intricate, intimate details about Joe Perry's life. He'd been living in Freewater for 20 years. He had 4 children of his own, so not quite keeping pace with his parents. And expressed that he was personally the result of triplets. I'm guessing there was lots of twins and triplets going on in that family for so many kids to be produced. But what I really liked was how this particular article is not how it ended, but it was right near the bottom. And it just goes to show, even if you're separated by more than 100 years, we're still lots of times kind of thinking more or less about the same stuff. And it's been, my whole life, there's been ongoing discussion about, population growth, population control, and our food supply, how long will the food supply keep up with us, and all that stuff. And that's referenced in this story. It expresses how, if families now or in the future choose to or continue to do what the Perrys did and have this obscene amount of children, it's going to force us to address the question of, are we going to ultimately have so many people in our world that things like the food supply are going to come into concern, whether we'll have enough food to feed everybody. This is back in 1905. God, if they only knew. I mean, if we went back to that time and told them there's over 8 billion people living on our planet now, they'd be like, well, y'all gonna die. Thank God I'm living when I did, because... And they might not be wrong. But I thought that was a little interesting little anecdote, because, as a guy that was born in the 80s, even if you're learning history about these other times, you're always gonna be a novice. You're never gonna fully understand the attitudes of the time. So I wouldn't think, just off the top of my head, that way back in 1905 they'd be thinking about things, so at least all that much, such as overpopulation, and in terms of how that could affect the world's food supply. Like that seems like such a contemporary thing. And that's the story of how, if you have enough kids, someday someone's gonna post a news story about you. I guess that's the moral. I mean, I don't really know what else to do with it. I just, as usual, it was too good of a story to pass up. So thank you so much for tuning in for today's This Day in History story. I told you this stuff is gonna be random and bizarre. That's just the way I like it. Who wants the same old boring crud? So, as always, if you want to help my channel grow, please remember to like, share my content around if you desire, subscribe, that's a big one. Hit up my Patreon if you want to help me out there. I'm posting there frequently. And the link to that Patreon is in the description below, along with the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages closely related to the content that I'm producing both here and on my other channel, Steve the Amateur Historian. Go over there and give that a sub if you like. It's definitely much more in-depth content, but I really enjoy this as well. And all that said, thank you again one more time from the heart for watching, and I will see you next time.